Hello, everybody. Welcome to the TriStar Gym channel. Today, I am super happy to have as a guest Mr. Michael Saylor, long-standing CEO of Microstrategies, and in my opinion, the top influencer in the Bitcoin world today. Michael, welcome to the channel. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan.
Are you? Do you watch MMA?
I saw you on Joe Rogan. I watched some MMA.
We got to get you on Joe Rogan soon. I got to have the fans. I want everybody to bombard Rogan, and I want you on the Rogan channel talk about Bitcoin, explaining to the world why Bitcoin is on fire. Michael, remind me real quick, how much have you invested in Bitcoin so far? Was it 3 million, 3.3 million? What was the number again?
I mean, all told, my company, Microstrategy, has invested $3,160,000,000.
3 billion, 3.1 billion.
Yeah, I put another 175 million of my own money. So I'm 3.3 something.
I love it.
3.35. I can't remember exactly.
I love it.
It's a lot of money.
A true Bitcoin whale out here in the open. It's amazing. So tell us, Michael, for the guys, there's a lot of people listening, they don't know much about Bitcoin. I'm a diehard Bitcoiner. I love Bitcoin. But for those who never heard about Bitcoin, why are you choosing to put your money in Bitcoin and not in the bank?
Let's start with first principles. You know, what is inflation? Inflation is when the government sucks the energy out of the currency. So if we go to an analogy that an athlete would understand, you run a dojo and the government sends you a note saying, I need all of your fighters to give me a pint of blood. So everybody donates a pint of blood. And to get ready for this, I Googled this and I found out that Google thinks it takes 4 to 8 weeks to replace your red blood cells. And you got 10 pints of blood in your body. So if you get bled 10% of your blood, then I guess you're not going to be the ideal top athlete for 4 to 8 weeks.
That's
right?
true.
And so maybe, you know, if you had a big competition, you would not want to do that within 2 months of the competition, but you'd probably train a little bit weaker too. So that's about 10% inflation. Now, what happened if you got a memo from the government? They said, we need a pint of blood from every fighter every quarter, every 12 weeks. Now you've got to like 25, 30% inflation, and now you're never really on. Now, what happens if the government sends you a note saying, well, we're going to need a pint of blood every month? Okay, so inflation is currency collapse, and currency is to the economy what blood is to the body, and value or energy is oxygen. So I'm sucking the blood out of your body, I'm sucking the oxygen out of your body. If I keep sucking the oxygen out of the room, you can't perform. When the inflation is running, the government says it's running 2%. It's not running 2%. Because the measure of inflation is a manufactured one. If I just measure things that don't go up in price, then inflation is low. But if I measure things that you want, like housing is up 27% year over year. The stock market is up 27% year over year. So if you wanted to buy a house, or if you wanted to buy a bunch of stocks, the inflation rate's 27%. The currency is losing 27% of its value. That is 27% of your blood getting pumped out of your body. Okay, so what we had was a low inflation environment, and it tripled in March of 2020. And we went from maybe, 7-8% consistent inflation in the US to now 24. And we've been running north of 20% for the past 18 months. So now, a simple observation, right? You're an athlete. If I told you that everybody's bleeding, what's your first thing you're going to do?
Call the cup man.
Stop the bleeding.
Call the cup man. You got to stop the blood.
Stop the bleeding.
You have to.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the first observation is you got to stop the bleeding if you're an investor. And how do you stop the bleeding? Well, if you have all your money in a bank account, and it's in US dollars, you're losing 15, 20, 25% of your value a year. But if it's in pesos in Argentina, you're losing like 40% of your value a year. And if it's in Venezuelan bolivar, you're losing 95%, right? They're literally getting bled every week. It's like the government shows up and says,
you could be the best investor in the game. You're still going to go out. You're still going to be out.
If you're in an economy with hyperinflation, it's the same as getting bled to death. And so in an economy like Venezuela or Nigeria, Zimbabwe, or most of Africa, that's a currency collapse, which is like you're on life support on a ventilator. There is no investment strategy or business strategy that will save you, right? You're in deep trouble. If you're in America or in the Western world, then your currency was getting weaker 6, 7, 8% a year, but now it's getting weaker 15, 20, 25% a year, depending. We can debate back and forth what the inflation rate, but the reason it's hard to pin down inflation is because if you want to sleep in your parents' basement and watch Netflix and order pizza, the inflation rate's not that high. If you want to rent a house, or rent an apartment on your own, the inflation rate's higher. If you want to buy a house, the inflation rate is 25%. And if you want to buy other scarce assets, then the inflation rate is running sort of around the S&P 500 index. So if you want a surrogate for inflation, look at the rate at which a basket of 500 desirable stocks goes up in price. And that will tell you the rate at which the money supply is expanding. Or look at the rate at which housing, the Case-Shiller index went up 27% year over year, July to last July. It's running in that range in the last 4 months. That's the highest rate of housing price increase since 1987. So if you want to be rich, your inflation rate is the rate of the S&P 500. That's the cost of capital, right? And what the government says is, well, our CPI is going to measure things, but it won't include energy, it won't include housing, it's not going to include food.
It's not accurate.
Okay. If you don't want housing, food, and energy, then there is no inflation. But in what universe are you not going to want housing, food, and energy?
Exactly. Your money doesn't go very far. It doesn't do much.
Okay, so the first observation is, you got to understand inflation. And if inflation is the cost of capital, and the cost of capital is like the rate at which the S&P index goes up, which is about 27%, well, for us, for 100 years, S&P went up 10% a year. So for 100 years, it felt like 1/3 of what it is this last 18 months. So why did we get into this, into Bitcoin? Well, inflation is the rate you're bleeding. We have to stop the bleeding. We had a bunch of cash. We had a $500 million business growing 0% with $500 million in cash, earning 0% interest. And the value of the money is falling at 15 to 20% a year, which means shareholder value is falling, which means that, if you had all your life savings and you sat there and you lost 15 to 20% a year for a decade, everybody knows I can't just save all my money in a bank account yielding 0% interest and expect to put my kids through college or retire on that. In a decade, your money would get cut in half 2 or 3 times in value, right? So what's the strategy? You got to stop the bleeding. Now, what is stopping the bleeding economically? It means convert your currency into property that the government cannot debase. So, the Venezuelan government can print 1 million times more currency, but if you own a house, you've still got the house. They're not taking 1% of the house every week, right? So your question is, what property do you buy? Do I buy a building? Do I buy a house? Do I buy art? Do I buy gold? Do I buy commodities? Do I buy stocks? Do I buy ETFs? Do I buy crypto? Do I buy Bitcoin? What do I buy? Something. I got to buy something with my money. They tell stories about hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, and management consultants are taking all their money and they're buying like a bicycle, or buy soap, or buy toilet paper. The toilet paper will hold its value more than the currency will, because at least it's still something.
I heard that goat shit was worth more because it burns longer than the money that burns. They value the goat shit even higher.
I had money in Argentina, and the currency was collapsing. You know, it was like 1 peso to the dollar, then 3 pesos to the dollar, then 20 pesos to the dollar, then